When natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina or Sandy happen, Red Cross emergency response vehicles and volunteers make the news. But rarely shown is the fact that on average, Red Cross workers help a family affected by a home fire or other disaster 180 times a day. The Red Cross is there for nearly 64,000 disasters per year throughout the U.S., helping people like Gene Welsh of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. A smoke alarm installed by the Red Cross saved Gene's life, going off just in time for him to escape only moments before flames engulfed his house. The Red Cross helps people like Gene and communities all across the U.S., maybe even people you know. Generous donors make this work possible. Donor gifts enable the American Red Cross to sustain a strong nationwide infrastructure comprised of local offices, robust training, integrated IT and communication systems, a fleet of response vehicles, warehouses stocked with shelter and relief supplies, and partners to help mobilize to support one family or 100,000 families. The Red Cross also relies on a network of 330,000 volunteers in communities throughout the country who respond night and day, answering the call for help. So when you hear stories about people like Gene Welsh, you may realize that the Red Cross is your Red Cross too, a local charity staffed and supported by your neighbors, making a difference every day in your own community. You can make a difference in your community too. To join the mission to help people affected by disasters, big and small, visit redcross.org/give.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the second in our series of conversations focused on delivering the mission of the American Red Cross during this challenging year of 2020 in the midst of the global COVID pandemic. My name is Jill Coyle, proud American Red Cross board member here in Greater New York. I also serve on the Red Cross National Council of Women Leaders, known as the Tiffany Circle. So the Tiffany Circle is a way for the American Red Cross to recognize and engage women donors who have an interest in having a greater understanding of the mission of the Red Cross and the impact of their philanthropic dollars. It's a wonderful way to feel more connected to your giving, and I would certainly encourage you to consider being a part of the Tiffany Circle if you aren't already. More on that later from my co-chair, Dorothy Alpert. So we have an exciting program for you today, and I'll just quickly remind you that if you feel so inspired and would like to give to the Red Cross, you should see easy donation options on the left of your screen for you to consider throughout the program. Our last virtual event, we had a conversation with American Red Cross CEO Gail McGovern, who was able to share with us a broad perspective of delivering every aspect of the Red Cross mission during this unique time. We also heard from actress and activist Sharon Stone about her work with the Red Cross. Today, our focus and conversation will be centered specifically on disaster response. 2020, in the midst of everything else, has brought a never-ending string of disasters, an unprecedented number of named storms in the Gulf, and wildfires that have ravaged California and the American West. Today's speaker, Brad Kaiserman, is, I think, a combination of Red Cross expertise and celebrity. I like to call him the Rambo of disaster response. Of course, he has a much more civilized title, Vice President of Disaster Operations and Logistics for the American Red Cross. As you might imagine, unfortunately, he's been extremely busy this year. So to give you a little background on Brad, prior to coming to the Red Cross, Brad held leadership positions with the U.S. Coast Guard, Department of Homeland Security, and FEMA. He is also a member of the affiliated faculty of the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, which is a joint program of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And I just learned in speaking with him last week that he is also now joined as a faculty member at Georgetown University. In his over 30 years of public service, both before and now with the Red Cross, Brad has been integral to countless crisis operations and responses to both man-made and natural disasters, ranging from the Exxon Valdez oil spill, international drug interdiction, mass shooting events, and, as I mentioned, the increasingly frequent large destructive natural disasters, such as hurricanes and wildfires. So a huge welcome to the man who literally never sleeps, Brad Kaiserman. Hi, Brad. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Jill, and I'm definitely, I definitely feel like I lead a team of people who never sleep, but thank you for the very kind introduction. It's great to be here. Good afternoon,
Sure.
everyone.
Sure. Sorry. Sorry about that nickname. But, I think the last time you and I were together in person for an event was the fall of 2019 for the summit in Washington, D.C. And I believe you were returning from the Hurricane Dorian response in the Bahamas, and you landed at something like 2 a.m. in the morning in DC, only to have me put you on the program very early the next morning. So I know you truly never sleep. And so just please know how grateful we are to have you with us. And hopefully Zoom makes this a little bit easier for your schedule. But so Brad, so there's so much to talk about here in terms of disaster response, and I have a few questions for you. But I was thinking if you could start us off by taking some time to share with us a view into what the Red Cross has been up to in terms of disaster response these last few months in particular, and perhaps also how that mission delivery has been affected in the time of COVID. And then once you've sort of shared some of that with us, we'll come back and continue our conversation.
Thanks, Jill. I appreciate it. It's funny because after I did the event with you in September, I think we went right into Hurricane Imelda. And we've been running nonstop ever since. Folks, I would tell you that I know we use the word unprecedented, and certainly from a fundraising perspective and trying to recruit volunteers, it's a powerful word. I was saying to Gail the other day, I regret that I have ever used that word before now, because we are truly seeing something that I don't think we've ever seen before in our lifetimes in terms of the impact of the natural world on the built world. Certainly, we've been through massive mobilizations in the history of our country, whether it was for war or for other crises. But what we're seeing now outside of war is truly unprecedented. I tried to think last night, and last night was probably the first chance I had a time to think in weeks about how to frame this year for all of us. And I was trying to put it into some neat buckets, and it was challenging because the whole year has played out against the backdrop of COVID-19. And I'm going to share my screen with you while we talk here and show you some things. What I'm going to be sharing with you is RC View, which is our geospatial data analytics and operating system. And let's make sure we get that for you. There you go. You should be seeing that screen. So this is our picture today across the United States. But, before we look at the disaster activity we've had today and throughout the course of the year, I think it's important to look at where we are with COVID. So we've drawn our COVID data from the warning system. And as you can see, nearly every state in the union is now in an active or imminent outbreak. And when you think about where we in the Red Cross are operating, we're operating here in Oregon, in California, in Louisiana, and in Florida today. Those are our major operating areas. So we're fortunate that for now, these areas are at high risk of outbreak, but they're not undergoing active or immediate outbreaks. Now, you know that the disease doesn't respect the border here. And so when I look at Louisiana and take a deeper dive, where we have thousands of people who remain in shelter following multiple, I think now we're up to 5 hurricane landfalls in Louisiana. We can see over here in Southwest Louisiana, one of the hardest hit areas, Cameron Parish, they're at full up outbreak right now. And we can see that it's growing in other parts of the state. So we use this data that you're seeing right now to help us understand where we're responding and what the need of protection are. Our incidence of infection in the Red Cross workforce has been less than 0.5% of the deployed disaster workforce, less than 0.5%. And part of the reason for that is we saw COVID coming in early January. And I won't say that any of us had a picture of what November would be like, but we did see the rising of a pandemic, and we took steps to acquire personal protective equipment. And because of that, we were able to protect our workforce and thereby protect our mission. And the workforce has been incredibly cooperative and mutually reinforcing at wearing face masks, maintaining social distance, and washing their hands frequently. And think about just how hard that is when you're doing disaster work that inherently involves getting close to people, whether it's because of mass care or the need to provide empathy, just a gentle touch to connect. That is the one thing we cannot do this year and probably next. And so we've really had to adapt our strategy and our tactics across the country so that we could continue to provide service during COVID-19 and continue. It's not just the disasters that have been unprecedented, but the response is equally unprecedented. Today, we have 29 active relief operations around the country. And we're still seeing multifamily fires and single family fires. You can see here in the column, they're still happening, big ones around the clock. In the past 48 hours, we had a multifamily fire here in Dayton, Ohio. And just again, over the past several weeks, we've got multiple disasters. You know that we rank disasters by number. The number is equivalent to complexity, which is we often use cost as a proxy for that. We use a system of 1 through 7. Well, we've got a 7 here, and there's a 7 up here. We've got 6s all over the country and 5s. We're operating way above our national readiness target, and we continue to operate. I'll give you 2 examples of this. We're responding now still to the massive wildfire in Oregon, the massive wildfires in California, and multiple hurricane landfalls, most specifically here in Louisiana. And as we do that, we haven't had any shortfalls of human resources at all. In fact, this season, beginning in the spring, seeing what was coming, we started something called the Seasonal Readiness Campaign to bring on new volunteers in the highest risk geographies that we had identified through data analytics, the tools you're looking at now. 8,000 new volunteers, 8,000. And 75% of them have deployed in the last 3 months. So we have been able to continue working with our previously affiliated volunteers and with these new volunteers from the Seasonal Readiness Campaign, which was hugely successful. Quick story. I had a chimney fire, or thought I had a chimney fire, in my house the other night. And called 911, the fire chief came. I live on the top of a mountain, so if you don't get a fire company out there quickly, it has impacts on other people in terms of wildfire risk. So fortunately, it wasn't a chimney fire. I just built a very hot fire, but I had a chance to talk to the chief of the county fire department. And he said to me, he said, all these people who are here fighting your fire, and I thought he was going to say to me, they're all volunteers. He said, they're all career people. We can't even get volunteers. I said, Chief, we're having a remarkably different experience in the American Red Cross because we've got volunteers who are literally coming out every day, new ones, affiliated ones wanting to work. Since January, we've made 21,000 staff assignments, and 6,000 of those were on the ground in person during COVID. And today, we've got nearly 400 people who are still out across the country in Louisiana, Oregon, California, and they're deployed on the ground, still working and still dealing with disasters. So, and the virtual team's been phenomenal. There's so much work we can do virtually, including casework and shelter resident transition, a lot of the back office stuff that we do in op centers. And everyone has really come out and said, hey, if I can't deploy in person, I still want to go virtually. So that's just been amazingly successful. So here's what I can tell you about this year. First of all, our major tactical change was having to go from sheltering people in school gymnasiums and civic centers to sheltering people in hotels. I want you to look at this big number right here. That is 1.2 million hotel overnight stays for people who in any other year would have been in a church basement, a school classroom, or a civic center, but some congregate setting. And of those 1.2 million hotel overnight stays that were provided, we, the Red Cross, we have funded 808,000 of them. So we are well into the 80% of all hotel rooms provided to people this year in disaster were funded by the American Red Cross. And now, if we look at all of the rooms, including those funded by government, and that's in California, somewhat in Oregon, if we look at all of these rooms, the Red Cross provided service for each of these stays, whether it was feeding, healthcare services, mental health services, casework, financial assistance. We provided services to these hotel rooms. So 1.2 million hotel overnight stays. And today we've got, as you can see here, just about 4,400 clients remaining in 116 hotels. And they're in about 2,200 rooms. And for most of those clients, there is no path home right now. They had housing pre-disaster. They don't have homes now, destroyed by wildfire, destroyed by hurricane, destroyed by flood. And we are going to have to continue with some of these disasters to be providing mass care, non-congregate sheltering, and casework well into January and February for disasters that happen in September and October. And so it's really just been a incredible year for changing tactics, having to change strategies, and making sure that our people were safe. Finally, I just offer you this. If I had to put it into three big buckets, I couldn't. We have COVID-19. We've had an unprecedented hurricane season, 29 named storms. To put that in context, the average in any given year is 11. 12 hurricanes formed, average in any year, 6. 5 of those major hurricanes, average in any year, 2.6. So we are running at 100% plus across the board for every statistic you can imagine for hurricanes. For wildfire season, the worst ever season in the history of the state of California, the largest and worst wildfire in the history of the state of Colorado, and the largest, most damaging and worst wildfire in the history of the state of Oregon. And we still have people right now in hotel rooms and needing services and casework from each of those. Then there was civil unrest. And whether it was the murder of George Floyd or whether it's the civil unrest currently surrounding the election process, the Red Cross has put people in hotels and provided casework to folks who were really innocent bystanders, their homes in the middle of areas that were the subject of clashes between conflicting groups. And local authorities said, Red Cross, we're going to get these people out of these neighborhoods. They're not safe. Can you take care of them? And the answer is, yes, we did. And yes, we can. And so all of those, along with derechos, dam breaches, earthquakes in Puerto Rico, if you remember those, spring tornadoes, it's just been an unprecedented year. So that's what it looks like from where I'm sitting. Back to you, Jill.
Thanks, Brad. The Red Cross is so lucky to have you. I think that every time I hear you speak. I love what you said about the response from our volunteers and the seasonal readiness campaign and those 8,000 new volunteers on top of our already large workforce, volunteer force rather. So I have a question. So I have to confess, there we go. We have both of our pictures. I have to confess, I shared my Rambo of disaster response nickname for you with your boss, Gail McGovern, last week. And she loved it. She said you approach every disaster response with fully engaged military precision, were her words. So my question is, I'm wondering, with so much of our workforce, with 90% of our workforce being volunteer, and especially in the midst of COVID limitations, how challenging is it to deliver that military precision consistently with every disaster response?
I believe that all of our responders have a unity of mission, right? Everyone who responds in the Red Cross believes and wants to be part of a movement that prevention alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies. Whenever there's disagreements among staff and volunteers, partners, and others, I find that if we bring everybody back to the mission, we come to a solution. And my experience in the military was exactly the same. And so I think the biggest difference here is that my personal interest in military history and military operations aside, just like in the military, the team has a shared mission, and that is what brings them together every single time. And it's that unity of mission, that clarity of mission, that makes this very much like a military operation. And think about it, the Red Cross was born on a battlefield. And so the mission is just different. The mission is to prevent and alleviate suffering, not to take territory or win the nation's wars. Right now, I would tell you the nation's at war with the climate. The nation's at war with Mother Nature. And so sometimes it takes that sort of strategic thinking and approach to make sure that we're seeing everything and able to respond to the most important things.
Fantastic. I love that thought on unity of mission. And I know you and I have spoken about sort of in this current climate of sort of divided everything. I love that those volunteers come together and are happy to do that. And it sort of speaks to the Red Cross principles, including neutrality and impartiality. And I love that all of our volunteers embrace that. So that's so great. You showed RC View, which for those who don't know is something called Red Cross View. It's part of the technology that the Red Cross invested in a number of years ago to sort of enable these disaster responses. And clearly in a time like this, it's been, I would imagine, more helpful than ever. And I should put a plug in for the fact that, in terms of fundraising, certainly this is why the Red Cross, and I know in the New York area, we have sort of this, what we call pre-responder campaign, but certainly when you hear ever the Red Cross speak about blue sky versus gray sky, the point is blue sky or non-disaster times, which is probably hard to think back to a non-disaster time at this stage. But in non-disaster times, that's why we do have fundraising to enable us to provide gray sky or disaster time mission delivery. So that Red Cross view that you showed, I would imagine it. And so does that also track, you talked about now that we aren't able to do congregate shelters and we have people in hotels, and does that literally track every last volunteer and every last sort of client or recipient of Red Cross services in those hotels, et cetera?
It tracks every single hotel. We don't track volunteers. There's some privacy issues involved with that, and we respect those privacy issues. We could do it, and I suspect at some point in the future, just from a safety perspective, when people are on duty, so to speak, we may want to turn on some of those features. But for now, we use some less sophisticated means of keeping track of folks. But we do use RCView to track all of our potential COVID cases, potential COVID infections. I can show you every hotel. If you were looking at the map earlier, there was a bunch of green dots. Those are the disasters and where the headquarters are. There's a bunch of blue dots. That's every hotel in the country. And we can see that in the context of weather, disaster risk, and now security risk. We had to build out a tool in RCView a few weeks ago because we were seeing credible threats and continue to see credible threats for civil disturbances in the aftermath of the election. I spoke with Trevor Reagan, and I spoke with Harvey Johnson and Cliff Holtz and Gail yesterday. And Gail said to me, are we out of the woods yet? And I said, no, boss, we're not. We're not going to be out of the woods until leadership on both acknowledges the end of the election process, and we get to a president that everybody can agree was elected fairly, and whoever that ends up, however that all ends out playing out, until we are able to get that certainty from senior government leaders on all sides. There are elements within the United States and without who would use this time to disrupt our civil discourse. And so we've had to use RCView to map the several hundred hate groups that are active across the country. We've been working with the International Red Cross to map their crisis monitoring data with respect to the U.S. And so, not every lawful protest isn't a civil disturbance. A civil disturbance is a time when the disruption to the community, usually as a result of violence, is significant enough that authorities need to intervene, usually in some sort of kinetic way. So we're very judicious about what we call a civil disturbance. But a number of our local government partners came to us in the weeks coming up to the election and said, will you be able to do what you did during the George Floyd event? And we said, yes, we'll be able to continue to shelter people outside the area. Gail made it very clear to us that the safety of the workforce was paramount. And she was very clear with me that I was to take no action. If I had to choose between jeopardizing a member of the workforce and anything else, I should choose not to jeopardize the member of the workforce. And so RCView has let us see where all the risk areas are. Every regional executive in the country has criteria and the ability to designate an area for escalated threat. We can see that. We've mapped every single biomed facility, Red Cross building. And once that area of threat is defined in RCView, we can immediately see every facility, all ongoing service delivery, all shelters in that area, and very rapidly either shelter people in place or evacuate our people. And it's those kind of tools that we can use across business lines that are fundamentally changing the way we're doing business in the Red Cross.
Fantastic. That's amazing technology. And I love, again, back to that neutrality. That's why we're able to sort of help in these kind of circumstances. Right. Can you talk a little bit about the scalability of the Red Cross relief operations?
I will, and I'd like to go back to a comment you made a few minutes ago about Blue Sky fundraising being the foundation of resources for Gray Sky response. So first, I'll be the first to say I haven't seen a Blue Sky day in about 5 years, but I'm sure they'll come back eventually. I'm also going to say, and I'll say for the end, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Quite the contrary, actually. But in terms of our scalability, we undertook the development of a readiness program now probably 4 years ago, under the leadership of Harvey Johnson, who was then the Senior Vice President for Disaster Cycle Services and is now the President for Humanitarian Services. And we were able to describe readiness in 4 very clear terms: that of having the necessary people available to respond, having the necessary supplies available to respond, having accessible infrastructure, whether that's buildings that people who have a disability can get into, to our programs to make sure that if we're delivering services, people understand our programs and have access to those programs in the field. If we're building technology, to make sure that that technology is accessible to our partners, that we can share vital information, which, by the way, the information sharing environment this year for disasters, largely because of COVID driving a crisis that drove people together, has been superb. If there's a silver lining in this, and I think there are many, the fact that people have been driven to share data that they were reluctant to share before, that is what's enabling us to get people safely into hotel rooms and then to get them casework back to their homes. It's really remarkable what people are sharing today. But and last but not least, besides accessible infrastructure, and thank goodness we have the systems to use the material we're getting, it's a supportive community. Because without the supportive community, you can have all the trained people and all the cots and blankets. You can have all the relationships with hotels and other vendors. You can have great RCView. If the community doesn't support you, if the community is not actively engaged in providing Red Cross volunteers, doing deliberate planning for disaster, supporting the protection of the nation's blood supply, if the community is not supportive, it's just an uphill slog. And we've been very deliberate, even as the Red Cross field infrastructure, our bricks and mortar, have shrunk so that we can use our resources more effectively to serve clients. We've still been very deliberate about not shrinking our relationship management with our government partners and our volunteer partners. And because of that, we have been able, because of that readiness that we've built, by the way, not buildable at all without non-gray sky dollars. If we don't have the dollars before incident, if we don't have the dollars before need, then we're always going to be behind. And this year, we had much of the dollars we needed before need, and that's what paid for the PPE. That's what made it possible to rapidly shift to a hoteling model rather than a congregate sheltering model. It's what allows casework to proceed. It's what allows training to happen. So all of those dollars built the foundation of readiness so that we could respond to 3 concurrent level 7s along with 3 concurrent level 6s and 6 concurrent level 5s. That doesn't just happen. That is deliberate planning, a program, and the resources to execute it. And for all of you, I would tell you, I'm both personally and professionally thankful for that support. We've had hard to say this in a year like this, from a disaster operations perspective, we've had a great year. We have had a great year doing our mission. We have had more opportunity to prevent and alleviate suffering than we've had even in the past several years where we were seeing rapidly intensifying disasters. This year, even more so. By the way, that's not just me feeling it, that's a documented fact. We've now had more disasters this year with a cost of $1 billion in insured loss or more. That is more than ever in the history of the Republic. And if I look at just the rate of those disasters, I crunched the numbers last night. And when I looked at this, we were running, in the 1980s, we were running about 2.9 of those $1 billion disasters a year. In the past 5 years, we're running on average 13.8 billion dollar disasters a year. We're already at 17 and we're not done. Ed is still out in the Gulf. What I believe will become Iota is forming in the Caribbean. Both have opportunities for landfall in the United States over the next 2.5 weeks. Ed just had a landfall in Florida, and it's lingering out in the Gulf of Mexico. Not sure whether it's doesn't know what it's doing. But we're not done with all of that. So we will probably have a few more $1 billion disasters before the year is out. So it has been an unprecedented year. And it's been we've had just great opportunities working with our partners to help more people with more services. And we're doing that. And we could not do it without that pre-need support that so many of you have provided. So I am grateful. As tired as my team is, they're a tired, successful team, and you are the reason for their success.
Thank you. So I have 2 final questions or topics that I'd like to pick up on what you just said. But so the first being, you talked about the silver lining of all of the data sharing that was sort of prompted by or necessitated by the COVID time. What would you say? What COVID time sort of, I presume that will go forward post-pandemic, but what other sort of disaster response tools or protocols or best practices will you continue, sort of learning things that you'll continue post-pandemic?
So we put a lessons learned process into play at the beginning of COVID so that we knew that the disease was going to shift rapidly and that we would have to adapt to that. So we put a lessons learned process in, and it's just rewarded us 5-fold. And so a couple things that we've learned through the process that we're going to keep doing. So one is, we established a virtual watch floor, a virtual DOC, Disaster Operations Coordination Center, in early February, long before the interventions have been put in place. We wanted to make sure that we could operate this way, and it works fabulously. I mean, our ability to coordinate using Microsoft Teams, RC View, Power BI, technology like Zoom, I frankly, my biggest fear with it is there's no boundaries. My people will just keep working and working and working until they collapse. But if we can manage the boundary part of it, the collaboration and coordination is the best I've ever seen. It's even better than it is in person. I miss the person-to-person contact with our colleagues, but in terms of effectiveness and efficiencies, Microsoft Teams and all of the surrounding technology with RC View are in many respects a better and more cost-effective way to do the business we do. So that's one. Two, hotel operations. I mean, one, now we know how to do it. We went into the season believing that non-congregate shelters, hotels, were basically the same as congregate shelters, just vertical. They're not. They require different services, different financial arrangements, different transactional arrangements. Clients have different needs. And there's a different set of incentives and disincentives for people to begin their recovery when they're in a hotel and not in a school classroom on a cot. And even those are sometimes counterintuitive. And so we've learned so much about how to use hotel rooms, and they're a better experience for many clients. And so we've used them in the past for large multifamily fires that we respond to every week across the country. I think you're going to see that we're going to continue using hoteling for some mid-sized disasters and certainly for larger ones. FEMA put together a reimbursement program through the states. So we are effectively seeking reimbursement for many of those hotel rooms. And the COO's intention is to reinvest those dollars back into recovery for those disasters. So that's literally been golden for us, that the clients are going to benefit tremendously. They were in hotel rooms, they were protected from COVID, they had a better experience. And now the dollars that will come back for some of those rooms through government will now contribute to their recovery. So that's been, I'd like to see that continue as well. And last but not least, just in case we didn't know it, presence is a mission. And we had to deal with that in ways that we haven't for a while. Normally in a large disaster, you establish a congregate shelter and people come to it no matter what they need. If they need to charge their phone, if they need connectivity for the internet to call somebody or do a transaction, if they just want to come get information as a service, or if they need a meal, right? People come to the shelter and we send them to the shelter. That becomes the hub. How about in COVID-19? Where do you send them? Trust me, Marriott does not want the entire community showing up in its lobby. And so we rapidly realized it was during Hurricane Hannah, and then as we went into the beginning of the season, it became clear that we were going to have to open service sites in the community. And that was not the approach that we thought we'd be taking this year. We quickly adapted. Our volunteers came out in droves, and we set up a whole new process now by which, even without physical shelters, we can provide services in affected communities very rapidly, really at the speed we can set up a shelter. And so I think that those are some really critical lessons learned that have come out of COVID-19. And if not a lesson learned, at least a silver lining. You know, I teach my students and my team a concept called swarm leadership, which came out of the Boston Marathon bombing and the after-action reports from that incident. And it really says that there's these 5 leadership practices that we do when we're working large operations, and that's what makes us most effective. And the first one is unity of mission, and we've been able to drive that. The second one is generosity of spirit. And what that looks like is just trying to see things through the other person's eyes and being deliberate and mindful about cooperating and finding consensus with other agencies that you may not have had to work for, other people who have needs, or your clients or partners. So the third one is no blame. You can't be in a blame environment. We've got to move on and help accomplish the mission. And with respect to accomplishing the mission, the key there is stay in your lane, but help others be successful in theirs. And that can be as simple as the operations section chief walking up to the log section chief going, hey, how can I help you do your job today? How can I help you be successful? And that has really worked with us. So, and then it's this notion that all of that work is done on a foundation of trusted relationships, all of which really should be built pre-need. But if they have to be built at time of need, recognize that the trust you establish in the early hours of response, that's what's going to carry it through. So those 5 principles of unity of mission, generosity of spirit, no ego, no blame, stay in your lane, but help others be successful in theirs, and a foundation of trusted relationships. COVID has provided us, and this incredible year of disasters has provided us with the ability to really practice and perfect our swarm leadership. And we have so many leaders in this organization who I think are going to carry that forward regardless of the backdrop. And that to me is a silver lining as well, to see so many people working closely together, cooperating and coordinating. You mentioned earlier, Jill, that you referenced the divisiveness around the country right now. I don't think there's any question that there is certainly division of political views and potentially divisions of how we should all get where we need to go. But I will tell you this, red state, blue state, purple state, whatever, we've been to virtually every state in the union for the response this year, and we've drawn from every state in the union for responses this year. And I can tell you, and I don't mean to paraphrase the president-elect, but I can't help but use it. I don't see people coming into disaster responses or receiving response services acting like blue people or red people. They act like Americans. And that is what I've seen over and over and over again this year. Generally speaking, when I went into 2020, I have to be honest, I was more than unusually cynical. I had lost faith in people and in human beings. And it's incredibly ironic that in this year of all years, I have regained my faith in human beings. For all the bad things that we can do to each other sometimes, I have seen so much good this year, and so much of it coming from Red Cross volunteers and the workforce.
Well, I love hearing that, and I'm sure everyone on this call loves to hear that. It makes everyone proud to be affiliated with the Red Cross. So that's fantastic. I'm so sorry, but we've now sort of used our time. And as we wind down, I'm just hoping you can maybe quickly leave us with, please tell me the hurricane season is almost over. I know you referred to a couple of storms out there that you're keeping an eye on, but to use the not to be spoken U word, unprecedented, but can you give us anything positive as we move forward? I know I have a friend from New Orleans on this call, and certainly, they've seen, unfortunately, their fair share of disaster this year. What can you tell us about sort of modeling the predictability of what we have left in this hurricane season?
My screen, yes, no? Yep, there we go, perfect. Yeah, so this is the current picture, the threat picture for the current tropical outlook. So as you can see here, this is what I think will become iota, which is the next letter in the Greek alphabet. Right now it's pointing here, but there are a number of models that show it reemerging and coming back up through the Yucatan. And then after that, it's not quite clear whether it's Louisiana, Texas, or Mexico or bust. But the models generally have iota coming here. ETA is another conversation entirely. ETA has been very, very difficult to forecast for a variety of reasons having to do with its bizarre meteorology. But as you can see here, the current forecast has it moving north and really on Sunday or Monday coming back across the Florida Panhandle. Its prior track had brought it up across Cuba, then across the Florida Keys, where we saw considerable damage from rain, wind, surge, and flooding. And our teams finished damage assessment there this morning. So we'll be starting financial assistance here in the next couple of days. But it's gone out now and back into the Gulf. So we think that we're still going to see more from ETA, probably at the level of a tropical storm or tropical depression, which again, never count those out, because we've had like Tropical Storm Imelda last year, which was more devastating than some hurricanes that we've been through. And then in terms of wildfire, the wildfire risk is going to pretty much stay high, and I'll show it to you here for the rest of this month in California. And I'll just show you the current fire season outlook here. So this is the November outlook. So we still are at above normal risk in portions of Northern California and portions of Southern California. And these two areas were the hardest hit earlier in the year. And so we continue to have risk there through the end of this month. Looking forward into December, We get a little more risk here in the Ozarks, but these just generally doesn't manifest in populated areas. It's this that we're worried about in December in Southern California. These are highly populated areas, very dry fuels, continuing to give us some concern. Once we move into January, wildfire threat subsides for a while. We do see the season beginning much earlier and lasting much longer. Same with hurricanes. Tornadoes, very hard to foresee at any point early in the season. Last year, we thought it was going to be one of the worst tornado seasons of the century. It was not. There were some really bad tornadoes, but from a volume perspective, this year was not the tornado tragedy of the century. And the last one I'll just share with you is the COVID trajectory, which is really going to be a driver for all of this. And see if I can grab it up here. I'll just do it this way since my screen is in the way. So we are in a COVID surge right now. If I can get this up here, here we go. And that surge, as you'll see here, is forecasted to not peak until we get to January or February. So as I bring in the United States version of this, should be down here somewhere in the bottom under U. We are going to continue to see. Oh, I missed it somewhere. There it is. Yeah. So what we're seeing here in terms of surge activity is we're expecting to see the death rate continue to increase through February on the current surge rate. Of course, the rise on that will largely depend on people's compliance with the masks, social distancing restrictions as we get into winter. In terms of infections, though, it's more likely to go on this red line than it is on the purple line. Right now, it is tracking the red line. And so that, of course, would give us a peak somewhere around late January, early February. And this keeps getting pushed out further and further. You'll notice here that the amplitude is much higher than it was during the first peak in March or during the second peak in July. So we look like we're going into a very, very risky area from a health and pandemic perspective. The good news in all of that, most of the wildfire hurricane risk really does begin to subside. Every day's earthquake season, but it is what it is. So COVID's probably our biggest threat going into the next several months. That's what it looks like.
Okay, well, not entirely the positive close. I was hoping.
I'll give you a positive. Here's the positive.
No. Okay,
we're ready.
And then we really have to wrap it up. Yeah,
we're ready. We're ready because of the investment you've made in the American Red Cross. That is the positive. And if there has to be disaster and there has to be response, then let's be on the field and do our mission. That's the positive. And that's what I would take away from all of this. We're doing the mission.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you so much, Brad. I could talk to you all day long. That was fantastic. We're so incredibly grateful for your time today. And certainly the Red Cross is so lucky to have you. Thank you. Okay, bye, Brad. So next, I would like to introduce and turn it over to our new Regional Chief Executive Officer for the Red Cross in Greater New York, Mary Barnaby, who just joined us in this role in September. Hi, Mary. A little bit on Mary's background. After a successful career in the financial services industry, Mary's passion for the nonprofit sector led her to an encore career opportunity to serve as CEO for Girl Scouts of Connecticut, where she oversaw another largely volunteer-driven organization that serves 40,000 girl and adult members. So Mary has said that to quote her call to do more to make the world a better place made it difficult for her to turn down an invitation to join in a leadership role with the dedicated staff and volunteers of the Red Cross in their enduring mission to deliver relief to those who have suffered from disasters, big and small. Well said, Mary. So we're grateful to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jill. And, I do want to say that, with all that's been going on in the world right now, it's so great that you all joined us today to listen to Jill interviewing Brad, because, we haven't gotten the amount of media attention for these types of disasters that we would even normally get in a more normal year. So we hope you'll all spread the word that the work is going on despite COVID, despite so many other challenges, and we're here. with gratitude to all that helped to support us. So once again, I'm going to thank you, Jill, for all you do to support the American Red Cross. And I want to thank everyone who's out there joining us today for this important conversation. I want to give a special word of thanks to our sponsors, Alex Partners and Veronica Beard, who made this event possible and who support our Red Cross mission in so many ways throughout the year. A special shout out to the very strong and purposeful women who are part of our Tiffany Circle, and to all of our friends, new and old, who are with us today. Let me tell you, having listened to Brad, I am so proud to be the regional CEO for the American Red Cross of Greater New York. I joined this organization just a few short weeks ago. And as you heard from Brad, they have been weeks full of activity and service. But like many of you, I always knew about the Red Cross. And actually, it brought back a memory when I was in the 4th grade and I had to do a book report, and I chose to do one about Clara Barton, who founded the American Red Cross, and who has since then become one of my many sheroes. When you think about her going into the battlefield during the Civil War and fighting to bring this humanitarian movement to the United States, and she did it. She got support, she got Congress to charter this organization. It really shows how just one person could make such a difference. And this is really the spirit I see in our volunteers and our staff every day. During this historic season of disasters, we've seen over 150 of our team members in the greater New York area, either in person or virtually, come out to help support these emergencies throughout the country. The team members who flew out in person knew they would need to quarantine upon return in some cases, and many went out multiple times despite that. Each deployment is at least 2 weeks long, and many stretch for 4 to 6 weeks due to the intense needs of some of these communities. For the team members who deployed virtually, days would often run 12 to 16 hours, often across different time zones. Our staff, our volunteers, our partners, and our donors really do all they can to make our mission happen when people need it the most. Although many of you are calling in from all parts of the country, we are hosting this virtual event from the greater New York region of the American Red Cross, which includes New York City, Long Island, Rockland and Westchester counties, and Greenwich, Connecticut. These were some of the communities hardest hit by COVID-19 pandemic when it really hit us hard in the spring. And like many places across the country and around the world, we are seeing a resurgence in cases, as Brad pointed out. Regardless of this fact, the local Red Cross mission also never stopped. And we remain focused on supporting the communities who depend on the Red Cross every day. Since March, our local teams have helped more than 3,700 New Yorkers in our region after more than 1,300 local disasters. Our work may look a little bit different, as Brad pointed out. A lot of it is moved virtual in order to ensure health and safety, but the care and compassion of our team rings through whether on the phone or via a Zoom encounter. We also have had scores of volunteers who helped to distribute over 500,000 care packages to our frontline healthcare workers across New York City, who were all there on the front lines during the pandemic, as well as distributing tens of thousands of protective masks and toiletries and food boxes for our vulnerable families. We were able to support our community thanks to wonderful partnerships with other nonprofits and government partners. And we are so grateful for their support and to all of you for your support. I look forward to getting to know all of you and hopefully meeting you in person. I've been working remotely since I started, but I have to tell you, the organization is running smoothly and effectively despite that. So now I have the honor of introducing our co-host for this event, another strong and purposeful Tiffany Circle woman, Dorothy Alpert. Dorothy is a longtime board member with the American Red Cross, New York region. She serves as the co-chair of the Tiffany Circle of Women Leaders in our region, and she spent 33 years at Deloitte in a variety of executive roles. Thank you, Dorothy, for all you do for Red Cross. And I just want to say before turning it over to you how exciting it is for me to be at my very first Tiffany Circle event here. As you know, coming from the Girl Scouts, I'm a big advocate for what women can do and girls to make the world a better place. And I have to say the Tiffany Circle really harkens back to our founder, Clara Barton, and the amazing work she did as one woman to make this organization grow into what it is today. So Dorothy, thank you for all you do, and the floor is yours.
Very well said, Mary, and thank you. It's such a privilege to work with you. And I'm so happy that the Red Cross found you and you found the Red Cross. So as Mary said, I'm a proud Red Cross board member. I'm co-chair of the local Tiffany Circle with Jill, and also with Jill sit on the National Council of Tiffany Circle Leaders. Each day, I'm just absolutely inspired by the work of the Red Cross. How is it not possible to be inspired when you listen to someone like Brad and you listen to the statistics that Mary shared? So whether it's collecting the life-saving blood that's needed, or whether it's supporting our military members and their families, or training thousands of people annually in CPR and first aid, and helping families after disasters of all sizes, working to build more resilient communities, or even supporting some international missions through the work with Red Cross International and the Red Crescent Network, it's pretty clear that the work of the Red Cross is very far-reaching and it never stops. Just like Brad, it never sleeps. I'm so grateful that Brad could join us today and share some of the information, some both disheartening, but a lot of heartening news in there. And it's nice to hear some silver linings that have come out of all the tragedies that have happened over the past year. Brad's passion and commitment just came right through in terms of his help for others. And you can see how he creates such a strong spirit of service, not just probably in his classrooms, but certainly in every disaster relief operation. Brad provided some great insight, quite frankly, about how the Red Cross was there when disaster has struck throughout the past year. And quite frankly, also how it's still present, as he showed on his maps, across the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, and every day in our local communities. But one thing is clear from what we heard from Brad. I won't use the U word, but I will say this is a historic season of hurricanes and wildfires. And the work of the Red Cross is needed more now than ever. Red Cross teams can provide millions of overnight stays to people affected by these disasters because of the support of people like you on this webcast, or our volunteers, our partners, and our donors. Jill and I are both so grateful for your participation in our second Tiffany Circle of Women Leaders conversation. These conversations are intended to share some information with you and provide an opportunity to exchange ideas among the people presenting and to encourage you to take some action in your community. This is because the Tiffany Circle of Women Leaders follows in the Red Cross tradition that harnesses the strengths and skills of the American public to address unmet needs in our community. Members of Tiffany Circle are leaders in their communities and they're leaders at the Red Cross. They help to advance the Red Cross mission through some investments of their time, their talents, and thankfully their treasure as well. Since the Tiffany Circle was founded, I think 2007, its members have made a life-saving impact in their local communities across the country and across the world. We're now more than 1,000 members strong across the country and growing. And our international circle is growing as well. Tiffany Circle members have collected, provided extraordinary financial support. It's amazing to think this number, more than $120 million to fulfill the mission of the Red Cross. But as you heard from Brad, those are some small numbers in terms of the need. The Tiffany Circle is a way for the Red Cross to recognize women donors and to help them feel more connected to giving, and not just connected to their giving, but the impact of their giving. Here in the greater New York region, I'd just like to give you a couple of examples of how some of our most talented and dedicated group have gone into action. My good friend and fellow board member, Heather Goodchild from Brooklyn, New York. She drives an emergency response vehicle during disasters and also works with us as a government liaison to maintain our lines of communication with our government partners, which is so important as some of our funding does come from the government. Heather Wise from Greenwich, Connecticut, who rolls up her sleeves this spring and helped deliver care packages to healthcare workers on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic in New York City. Suzanne Packer, who actually deployed to support the Red Cross response to hurricanes back in 2018. And yes, our own Ashley Banfield, who many of you may know from Court TV. But did you know that she actually traveled with a group of fellow Red Cross board members to help support a Red Cross recovery efforts after Hurricane Maria? Ashley, I remember fondly those activities where we spent a day on a farm together in Toa Baja, helping prepare the fields and tending to the crops for a family-owned business. If you share this passion for helping your community with your time and treasure, I invite you to join Jill and I and the other members of the Tiffany Circle of Women Leaders to put your advocacy into action. I also encourage you to invest in the Red Cross now as well, using the button on your screen, and each dollar will be matched by a generous group of Tiffany Circle leaders: Ann Kaplan, Lisa Donahue, Gianna Miller, and Jill Coyle, up to $250,000. Your donation can help the Red Cross deliver its life-saving mission nationwide during this historic time and beyond. And remember from what Brad said, it's those monies that we have in advance of the disasters that help us deliver the mission even better during times of disaster. So I want to thank you on behalf of Jill, Mary, Brad, for listening today and for all of your generosity and support. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Tiffany Circle conversation series, probably in late winter, early spring. Thank you and have a great day.